Number 10. The Dark Knight. So while many have horrifyingly dismissed Mark as just another Batman ripoff, we're here to calmly assure you it's just not so. While there are a good number of similarities that can be pointed to in regards to the heroes, never fear, Top 10 Nerd is here to point out the prominent differences. Batman fights for justice, so he never kills, whereas Moon Knight fights for Konshu and was a former mercenary, who has no problem whatsoever with killing his enemies. Beyond that, their motivations are completely different. Batman is driven by his guilt in the death of his parents, Mark is driven by his almost contractual obligation to Konshu. His path as a hero is less direct and takes him all over the place. Then there is the easy one. See if you can spot it. Batman wears all black, Moon Knight wears all white. Batman hides in the shadows, Moon Knight wants his enemies to see him coming. That's why he wears white. I'm not making that up either, that's straight out of the comics. Number 9. Not so ancient weapons. While his weapons come from the ancient Egyptian tomb where he was laid to rest beneath Khonshu's idol and received his powers, they are not as old as they seem. Well, they sort of are, but they also aren't. His weapons are actually surprisingly modern. While this may not seem scary to you, this story involves some timey-wimey time travel stuff, and time travel can be pretty terrifying as it can mess up you and your life's trajectory. Hardcore. To me, the idea of that is pretty scary. In a West Coast Avengers storyline, the team gets flung thousands of years into the past and ends up in ancient Egypt. Hawkeye fashions weapons to help the priests of Khonshu defend themselves, and it is these weapons that end up in the tomb where Moon Knight later receives his powers. So yeah, he wouldn't really be himself if not for time travel and Hawkeye and the West Coast Avengers. And oddly enough, Moon Knight also becomes a West Coast Avenger. Weirdly cyclical storytelling, making me wonder if the Marvel Universe is actually stuck in some kind of time loop. Number 8. Bushman was resurrected. So if you've watched my part 1, you know that Mark skinned Bushman's face off and left him for dead after breaking both of his own knees in their epic fight. But did you know that Bushman was later resurrected? Yep, that's right. You thought resurrection was just saved for Konshu? Cause it's not. Moon Knight goes up against Bushman again after he is resurrected by the Hood. The Hood resurrected Bushman when tasked by Norman Osborn with getting rid of Moon Knight. During the events of the Vengeance of the Moon Knight series, a tussle eventually ensues between Moon Knight and his #1 enemy Bushman. Mark gets the upper hand and impales Bushman with a machine gun. He actually goes to cut off his face again, but decides against it in the end. Whew. Number 7. Member of the Avengers. That's right, Moon Knight was even Steve Rogers approved to join up, even after he terrified Beast after having an indifferent, some would say even jovial reaction to being shot in the leg. Despite the fact that he often claims that he is a loner, Mark has actually been a part of multiple Avengers teams, including the West Coast Avengers. Many other heroes have feared working alongside him simply because they worry about his mental instability and how it will affect him while on missions. Granted, so far he has managed to behave pretty well while on teams and rein in his other personalities when he needs to. Number 6. He fights ghosts. You heard me right. The cool thing about Moon Knight is because he has so many different personas, he is actually a very versatile hero and character. He can fit in almost anywhere, whether it be in his own dark violence stories, in the criminal underbelly of New York, serving vigilante justice, alongside the fellow Avengers, or in the mystic realm. He has even worked alongside Doctor Strange. We could see him pop up in the MCU just about anywhere, and he could fit in. He has proven before that he truly belonged in the mysterious mystic world when he was in his detective persona, Mr. Knight. During Moon Knight Volume 5, we see him take to the streets, solving mysteries and punching ghosts. Literally. Spooky.
Number 5. Acupressure. So She-Hulk has a host of skills, cause she isn't as powerful as the Hulk all the time, depends what canon we're working on. It's a bit of a trade-off, she has more control than Bruce, usually, but because of this she has learned other skills, such as hand-to-hand combat. She was trained by Captain America and also Gamora. She also has an extensive knowledge of acupressure points, which in comic book terms means you have about 20 extra points to approaching God tier. She would use this on Abomination, a character who was named as such because of the fact that Stan Lee noticed that no other character had that name. Deep. But She-Hulk is called She-Hulk, so still, acupressure is yet another weapon in She-Hulk's mighty arsenal. Number 4. Tearing Vision in half. So Amanda mentioned this in part 1, but let's get specific about how this happened. I mean, yes, Vision is a synthezoid, but it's still dramatic. Nobody likes getting torn in half. This occurred during the sensational She-Hulk run. So She-Hulk has been on many teams, and that includes the Avengers. After returning to that team, she would spend time with her fellow Avengers, such as Jack of Hearts, and she would just kind of passively absorb radiation off of him. This would over time lead to her being unable to control her changes or herself, and this would lead to her tearing Vision in half. Hulk tear, Hulk rip. It turned out that this wasn't Jack of Hearts' fault at all, but the Scarlet Witch and her abilities back when she was still a mutant. I will accept no substitutes. That retcon made my heart sad. But I digress. Wanda and Vision have a complicated relationship that is actually very far from romantic when you break it down. I don't know. I've never subtly influenced reality to have my husband torn in half. That's all I'm saying. Number 3, Wyatt Wingfoot. We're actually going to talk about the abuses She-Hulk suffered here, but I wanted to name the number after Wyatt because not only does he support her, but he doesn't get talked about enough. Except when he's trying to usurp the position of best friend to Johnny Storm from Spider-Man. Stop it. So She-Hulk met Wyatt while she was on the Fantastic Four, during the period where the Thing had left, and he was there for her when some scuzzy things happened, such as a paparazzo taking her picture while she was sunbathing topless, and the only reason it didn't really fully get out there was because an editor color corrected her skin. She was later forced to strip naked by corrupt S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, who then medically examined her to see if she could be left unsupervised or have to be followed around like her cousin, but this was really so that they could get spank material. Jen hadn't really encountered things like this before, so it freaked her out and obviously made her feel unsafe. Wyatt was there to help her through that, because Wyatt's a dependable, sort of genuine nice guy, not a fake nice guy, except when he's trying to push out Peter. Let Peter have one friend who's not evil. He's earned it. These incidents are often referenced when we come to the digital era, and Jen calling out Bruce, her cousin the Hulk, for being jealous of her. Now Bruce and Jen have different experiences, but when you force me to compare the litany of horrors committed against her and him, she doesn't come out looking great in my opinion for calling him out for being jealous. Yeah, he might not know the whole story, fair enough, and be having a bit of the grass is greener, but Hulk got shot into space because he was such a problem. When he got there, he got to see the new people who eventually embraced him die. He was cut into pieces and kept in jars to see how far his rejuvenation could extend. For years he lived on the street, hunted by a special task force. He now can never die. He's been feared by friends and foes alike. The amount of times he's been hated in canon far outweighs the times he's been loved. Oh yeah, and if he gets too smart, he risks going full Maestro. In Elseworld stories, it's been established he'll be the last creature alive on the Earth. So yeah, I can see from his perspective being jealous of pretty much anybody else, even when bad things happen to them. I mean, would Jen want to be Bruce? And if so, why? Like that reporter who wants to be the Hulk and the Immortal Hulk? Like, girl, have you read all the Hulk? You should want to be someone with a good life. Like, I don't know, someone not in the Marvel Universe? Maybe Doom? Being Doom could be okay. Share your thoughts. I'm curious. Do you feel Jen was right to call out Bruce for being jealous of her? If so, why? I want to know. Because there's real world issue context and then there's Marvel canon context, and they can cause different responses. Number 2, fighting the Comics Code Authority. Now She-Hulk is known in many circles for being hot, sexy, big and green. She can bench press you and look hot doing it. I want to be bench pressed by the She-Hulk. But nowadays, this status has a bit of a complex relationship with fans. However, back in the day, it was seen by some as more of a sign of empowerment, because She-Hulk was fighting the Comics Code Authority. Established in 1954 as a result of Senate hearings following mass hysteria surrounding comic books and the link to juvenile delinquency, an unfounded link, just a hypothetical link, this was further exacerbated by Frederick Wertham's Seduction of the Innocent, which on top of policing violence in comics was quite critical of sexuality. The code was created so the industry could self-regulate or face government intervention. They chose self-regulation. This would create a panic around the presentation of women. For years there was a no cleavage or not too much skin unless they're evil, all kinds of subtle rules about how women could and couldn't be presented. One of the ways comic creators would fight back would be to reveal more of the woman. So her ripped costumes were actually a big FU to the comics code. Her naked cover, aside from being based off an extremely popular photo shoot of the time, was again an FU. You can't police female sexuality. Now for some this loses its punchline because it was largely pushed forward by men, but for others this was a big moment. She-Hulk has had a long history of being used to further ideas outside of her character itself, and that brings us to number 1. Number 1, changing her origin controversy. Disney Plus has been threatening a change in origin for the She-Hulk. Now whether they do or don't is less interesting than the why behind it. The MCU has changed many origins to suit itself in its canon, so if it did, it wouldn't be unprecedented. However, it is the why some people feel it should be changed that is fascinating. The She-Hulk originally gets her powers after being shot by some criminals that were involved in a case she was prosecuting. Jen is a criminal lawyer. To save her life, her cousin Bruce Banner gives her a blood transfusion. The gamma in his blood causes her to adopt Hulk-like characteristics, and she transforms and decides to embrace this and becomes the She-Hulk. Some feel that the fact that she gets her powers from a man is sexist and makes her less of a character, and so she doesn't stand on her own 2 feet, or at least does so less than other characters. While others feel She-Hulk is far more than her origin, and it doesn't lessen her anyways, as she made the choice to be a hero. She could have done nothing, become a villain or hidden, but as established she was a lawyer and she wanted justice, so she was already doing things to make the world a better place. So her becoming a hero after an incident like this made sense. Others feel everybody is just far too focused on origin stories, just throw us in head first. course. Open the show with her tearing Vision in half. Do you think She-Hulk's origin takes away her agency? Would it be better if she had gotten a blood transfusion from a woman, or just not at all? She was researching Hulk blood. Or would the same argument apply, that she's less of a hero because she's getting her powers from someone else? Or is she a legacy character? I mean, if we can have like 6 Flashes and Dick, Jason, Tim, Steph, Damian, Kira if you stretch, Robins, why not She-Hulk? And the other Hulks now exist. Just side note, also tons of characters have weak origins and turned out fine. Even the Hulk's is just okay. It's iconic, but I survived a radioactive explosion. It's not exactly my parents are dead.
Starting us off in at number 10, Small Ambitions. Did you know that Venom was never initially supposed to be an alien symbiote from Clintar? That was never in the cards for the black symbiotic suit that first appeared when Spider-Man donned it after the Secret Wars event in 1984's The Amazing Spider-Man issue 252. How did that all unravel, you might be wondering? Well, 2 years prior, back in 1982, a Marvel reader from Illinois named Randy Schruler wrote into Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, with an idea of an all-new black costume for Spider-Man. Shooter was intrigued, so Marvel bought the idea from Schruler for $220, kind of a steal. Then, Shooter came up with the idea to switch to the black and white costume, partially influenced by the costume design that Spider-Woman had at the time, which was quite popular. After his suit was destroyed during Secret Wars, Parker was directed to a place on Battleworld by Thor and Hulk that contained a machine that would instantly fabricate any type of clothing. Parker checked it out, but chose the wrong alien machine, which covered him with a new black and white costume that can mimic street clothes. Turns out it's just an alien costume that's trying to use him as a host. Fun. It wasn't until the costume received backlash from fans that it was withdrawn and taken off of Spider-Man, and then repurposed as a new villain, bonding with Eddie Brock to become Venom. Moving on to number 9, he's ditched a host. Venom knows what he likes. And if you're not it, he's not opposed to tossing you to the curb, quite literally in this case. In Marvel Knights Spider-Man issue 7, we were introduced to a fellow named Angelo Fortunado, who Venom would bond with when Eddie Brock auctioned the symbiote off. Brock sold it to Don Fortunado, who wanted his son to become a man. So naturally, the most rational way of doing that is by buying a deadly alien symbiote who has a flair for violence and an appetite for brains. More on that later. Good one, Don. Angelo and Venom bonded for a while until Venom got bored of him and ditched him in possibly one of the worst ways ever. He bailed on a battle with Spider-Man when it became obvious that he was losing. And then, while jumping over a bunch of rooftops, Venom detached himself from Angelo, letting Angelo fall to his death below, all because Venom thought that he was too much of a coward. I mean, he wasn't wrong, was he? But you don't have to murder a guy, do you, Venom? You can just be like, hey, let's just part ways. This isn't working for me. Moving on to number 8, 2 hosts at once. Did you know that Venom can bond with 2 hosts at once? It's not perfect, let's just say that, or pretty, but it's a thing he can do. For starters, it's as chaotic as it sounds, and really it weakens the crap out of not only Venom, since he's split between the two, but also the hosts he's trying to bond with. This was the case during a battle between Peter Parker and Eddie Brock, during their initial conflict after Venom had bonded with Brock, both physically and emotionally, and set out to kill Spider-Man. Peter sees that he's outmatched at the time and tries to trick the symbiote by begging it to come back to him. That turned into Venom trying to be bonded to both men at once, and also a nice little shot of both ripped men struggling in their undies. Men in comic books can be objectified too, friends. Eventually, Peter is strong enough to win the conflict, with Venom and Brock still both despising the web slinger. Up next, number 7, his first murder was in a church. In his very early days bonded with Eddie Brock, Venom starts off with a splash by killing a cop inside of a church. So, this went down in Amazing Spider-Man issue 300, which is Venom's first on-panel murder. Aw, baby's first murder. His plan initially was to lure Spider-Man to a church called Our Lady of Saints, but that backfired when Spidey used the sound of the church bell there to defeat him. Venom doesn't really do too well with loud, intense sounds. Venom wanted to have a little bit of poetic justice and lure Spidey back there again and trap him in that very same bell. But that also did not pan out for the Clintar, because when he was using the church as an impromptu HQ, a cop stumbled in and came upon Venom. The cop was investigating a criminal who had been stealing from church donation boxes, so instead of risking being exposed, Venom just killed him. In at number 6, Carnage is his kid. Venom would give birth to the Carnage symbiote in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 361. Context time! Clintars are not a very parental race of aliens. They generally give birth like they're laying eggs, but as soon as that offspring pops out of their body, they're gonzo. They don't raise it, and a big reason why is because offspring are always more innately powerful and stronger than their parents. Often the symbiote offspring is discarded and becomes a non-issue, which is what Venom deemed this particular situation to be. But while he was breaking Eddie Brock out of prison, he gave birth to Carnage, and Carnage then bonded with the psychotic serial killer that Brock had as a cellmate, Cletus Cassidy. It all went downhill from there, people.
Number 5, a familiar foe. It should also be noted that because Gorr the God Butcher has been around for so long, he isn't just some random villain that Thor comes across. Despite him not making his first comic book appearance until 2012, he and Thor go way back when it comes to their history with one another. In fact, when Thor first comes across the dead gods in issue number 1 of Thor God of Thunder, he doesn't ponder on who is behind it. He actually recognizes Gorr's handiwork and suspects him first and foremost. So despite the fact that he didn't exist in comics until 2012, when it comes to his backstory, the God of Thunder and Gorr still have had a history. In fact, historically, the first version of Thor that Gorr was familiar with was one from way back around 800 AD, a much younger Thor than the present day version that we're familiar with in the main continuity currently. Hence why we follow this version of Thor along with a present and a future version of the character, with their stories interwoven between each other in the Thor God of Thunder series, because, you know, we gotta explain the story of Gorr. Despite the year of release being 2012 onward, Gorr was also being retconned into Thor's history in this narrative. So it is possible in the film Love and Thunder, Thor will also be familiar with Gorr, and the two may already have had a history in the MCU that simply hasn't been touched on yet. Number 4, the Butcher in God Butcher. While there are times that you might feel sympathetic towards Gorr, especially considering his tragic origins, and at times his desire to kind of bring people together by killing gods and dismantling beliefs that may otherwise separate them, he is still very much a dark and murderous figure. He doesn't just kill gods, he straight up does butcher them, hence his title. He earned that title. For Gorr, he doesn't just want the gods gone, he wants them to feel pain similar to what he himself suffered, and he genuinely seems to enjoy tormenting and toying with gods because of this. You won't just see him make quick work of many gods he comes across, and if he does happen to make quick work of an enemy, it's still likely going to be brutal and bloody, which is what Gorr is pretty much known for in the comics. Number 3, cruelty. The other crazy thing about Gorr is just how cruel he can be. You would think after all he's lived through, he might be inclined to, you know, show like a modicum of mercy to those he has captured and not yet killed. After all, that's likely what a younger Gorr would have hoped for, mercy and kindness from his own gods. And yet Gorr was made hard instead by his experience, turning him somewhat into a hypocrite. Despite the fact that he cursed the injustice and cruelty of his gods, this is what he gives back to all those he comes across that oppose him, blinded by his pain and his rage. When Gorr captures Volstagg and makes him work for hundreds of years in his mines without feeding him anything, Gorr whips the god after he stole a loaf of bread. Volstagg reveals that he was starving, admitting that after hundreds of years, even a god needs to eat some amount of food and must give in to hunger. But Gorr only sees this as theft and greed. That is how blinded by rage he has become at this point, and that is how heartless Gorr is. He has no sympathy for any god, and like no matter the circumstance. He's like, are you a god? I don't care. I'm gonna treat you terribly. That's it. And then you're gonna die brutally. Number 2, Gorr the God. Speaking of the cruelty that Gorr showed Volstagg, his mistreatment of the Asgardian only got worse once Volstagg pointed out that even if Gorr managed to wipe out all of the gods, as impossible as that would be, he would never truly finish his mission. Why? Because Gorr himself had become an immortal god. He raised worlds, killed and did as he pleased, made others serve him, and in a way, kind of made others worship him. He was indestructible, undefeatable, and inevitable, all adjectives that you associate with godlike beings. According to Volstagg, Gorr had become the very thing that he claimed he hated. Needless to say, this was not a reflection that Gorr chose to subscribe to, and he was not very pleased that Volstagg had implied this about him. Still, I think Volstagg definitely was making sense with this observation, which is probably why it made Gorr so angry, because deep down, he knew that it was at least partially true. Number 1, Agar. Agar was the last member of Gorr's family to die before he found the Necrosword and became a killer of gods. After the death of his mother when he was only a child, the death of his pregnant wife later in life, and all of their other children, his son Agar was the only one left. When Agar died of starvation, that was the final straw for Gorr, who lost all faith in the gods completely, as a result of his guilt, his pain, and his inability to accept the loss of Agar, Gorr created an alternate version of his son, instinctively using the All Black to do so. This construct, it turns out, also represented the hatred that Gorr felt towards what he had become. Yeah, he pretty much knew he'd become a god, he was just in denial. Ultimately, this construct of Agar therefore teamed up with Thor to help him in defeating his father, Gorr, in the end revealing that he was truly no more than the symbiotic weapon that Gorr had carried with him for years, as Agar faded away.
Starting us off in at number 10, Deadpool 2. Believe it or not, but Omega Red was actually in Deadpool 2. He was planned to play more of a prominent role, but instead only appeared in a few frames in the prison Wade gets sent to. A behind the scenes feature was included where they showcased the villain playing chess with the cameraman between takes, and claiming that he had skipped the makeup department that day. Honestly, same. Without these lights, it's a whole other story right here. While the Deadpool incarnation has more skin pigment than his comic counterpart, the incarnation still seems pretty faithful. The only issue I really have with this is that the Omega symbol isn't centered on his forehead and it's drawn on. From the photos I saw at least. Being a graphic designer, it genuinely hurts me seeing this thing off to the side, but like not off to the side enough, you know? Like, have you ever heard of the rule of thirds? Despite my frustration, we could potentially see Omega Red be a potential main antagonist come any future Deadpool movies, and considering how well the other ones did, I'm pretty sure we're gonna be getting a Deadpool 3. Hopefully he'll make fun of Spider-Man 3 in that one and there'll be like a black suited Deadpool and he'll be like, ah. And at 9, Carbonadium. Carbonadium is the metal that forms Omega Red's arm tentacles. The metal was made as an attempt at recreating the adamantium that coats Wolverine's skeleton and forms his claws. Omega Red also wears carbonadium armor that helps protect against Wolverine's claws and even rockets. The Russian version of adamantium is also very radioactive and harmful to humans, causing Omega Red to have to drain the life force of others, which he does using his tentacles to be able to stay alive. This kind of metal has been possessed by Mark Spector, Peter Parker, Silas Burr, Wade Wilson, and Otto Octavius while he was Peter Parker in the Superior Spider-Man comic arc. The only way to get this metal is by using the carbonadium synthesizer, which has been stolen by Wolverine and thought to have been thrown in a river, but it was instead hidden in the body of a double agent who had died escaping from Omega Red with Wolverine, Sabretooth, and Maverick. Kinda weird, but I guess since they had stolen it, he died keeping it away from Omega Red, so he still was serving his purpose, I guess. And at 8, Ultimate. As with any Marvel character, there are plenty of other versions of that character from different universes and times, and if we were lucky, we get to see quite a few of them. The Ultimate Universe was created to form different versions of iconic Marvel characters, with Ultimate Spider-Man starting off the universe and getting highly praised. Obviously, this caused more and more characters to be adapted into this new universe, with new stories giving writers creative freedom, where they can do almost anything. There are some characters that had big changes made in this universe, so Omega Red was one of them. His Ultimate version is actually a Spider-Man villain, and he has faced off with both versions of the webhead in that series, and changes made to his origin caused his carbonadium tentacles to become organic, rather than artificial attachments that were grafted onto his body, which is slightly less horrifying, but also terribly more horrifying if you think about the implications of that. Like, how did you figure that out? And at 7, Immortal. Omega Red has been quote unquote killed on multiple occasions over his time, but always comes back like William Afton on steroids. This character was thought to be dead so many times, he had started to become Marvel's version of the character who would always return no matter what everyone thought. However, after tracking Wolverine for days and constantly having him escape, Omega Red happens upon him one more time. Wolverine refuses to fight, knowing it's only a part of a bigger plan. But Omega Red, being a villain, threatens to go after Daken if they didn't fight, which as he predicted gets Wolverine ready. However, he was only equipped with a broken sword. Upon seeing that Wolverine was wounded and only holding a broken sword, Omega Red laughed and gave him a free shot. But Logan had a trick up his sleeve. That broken sword was actually none other than the Muramasa blade, a mystic blade forged with a piece of Wolverine's soul, which helped it be able to kill anything. As his free shot, Logan threw the blade into Omega Red's heart, weakening him and eventually killing him. Fans only believed he was dead when, and at number 6, Hell. Because of his past actions and getting killed by Wolverine, Omega Red was sent to Hell, obviously. Only getting to fight again when the criminal organization known as the Red Right Hand had sent Wolverine's soul to Hell. As a response, Satan sent Omega Red to fight against his old nemesis side by side with several villains that Wolverine had put in the ground over the years. When he managed to get to Wolverine, he said he would make him suffer for eternity before Wolverine stabbed him in the gut. I mean, that really shouldn't do anything though. Like, you're already in hell, it's not like it can get any worse. And so what, your soul gets stabbed. Walk it off. Come on. I guess it's funny coming from me, I don't really have a soul.
Number 5. Limbo. Chasm isn't just allied with anyone when it comes to this dark web event. He's allied with one of the most powerful villains around, one of the most powerful people around, Madelyne Pryor. Madelyne Pryor more recently seemed to be focused on healing, moving past her traumas, not villainy, but it turns out this was all part of a larger plot to get what she wanted most. Madelyne Pryor apparently hadn't actually healed, at least not fully, and what she needed to complete the process, or what she needed because the process hadn't been completed maybe, was the memories that were stolen from her. These were the memories of Nate, aka once baby Christopher, growing up. Jean ended up acquiring all of Madelyne's memories following the original Inferno event in the comics when Maddie was defeated. Jean ended up in a way becoming like a mom to Nate because of this, because she had an emotional connection to him with all the memories of raising the baby that Maddie had prior. And now Madelyne wants all of that back. Well, she wants the backlog of stuff that she missed. She wanted not just the memories of raising baby Christopher, but also the memories of what happened with raising him after she'd missed out on that. And she also wanted all the memories involving her and her death and her funeral. And this was where her allegiance with Chasm basically came in. Chasm is also after his lost memories, which he feels Peter Parker has stolen from him, and aims to get them back himself and also end Peter Parker in a sort of there can only be one type showdown. Number 4. Hallows Eve. Not only is Madelyne an ally of Chasm, but so is Hallows Eve. Hallows Eve is actually Janine Godby, who is Ben's love interest. Kinda like his version of Mary Jane, but if Mary Jane had an even more messed up childhood and was also forced into becoming a murderer and a criminal in self-defense, spending most of her adult life in prison. Hallows Eve ends up becoming a villainous sidekick to Chasm and the Goblin Queen in the Dark Web event after Maddie uses the demonic magic of Limbo to give Hallows Eve powers. Hallows Eve can essentially create masks which have different effects on her enemies depending on which one she's wearing and wielding at the time. The symbolism here is kind of in reference to the fact that in her life, Janine has felt she had to assume many different identities in order to survive, which is why Maddie sort of gave her that power. Even her name, Janine, is actually not her original name, but one she adopted when she was on the run, although it is the name she chooses to be addressed and referred to by in preference to her given name, because obviously she has past stuff attached to that she does not want to think about, I imagine. Number 3. Venom. While not as Chasm specific, I feel like this point is still really relevant when it comes to Chasm and his story in Dark Web. Chasm and the Goblin Queen, along with their sidekick Hallows Eve, aren't the only ones who end up allied together in this event. Venom also gets sucked into this villainous team up himself, which might seem odd initially, considering that Venom is Eddie Brock, who isn't even really Venom anymore, but rather is the King in Black following the defeat of Knull. Not only that, but Eddie for the last few years has really been more of a straight up hero, not a villain at all. Venom, the symbiote Venom, would go on to bond with Dylan Brock, Eddie's son, but after Eddie ends up in Limbo requesting help from Madelyne and Chasm, Maddie sees an opportunity here. She agrees to help Eddie find his son, but in exchange forces him to join her and Chasm's plot, removing Eddie's memories of Dylan. Now this makes him believe he is Venom once more, but after he realizes his other is no longer there and he's alone, he instead becomes the future villainous version of himself, or one of those, Bedlam. Number 2. Gus. Maybe one of the darkest moments of all comes to us in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 14, at least thus far. In this late 2022 issue, Chasm is revealed to be allied with both the Goblin Queen and Hallows Eve, and ends up confronting someone who repeatedly has mistaken him for Peter, insisting that Ben pay him what Peter owes. Well, before Ben had simply responded that, he was not in fact Peter, so just stop talking to me, I'm not Peter. This time around, Ben instead beats the man up and then takes him to Limbo. There, Madelyne Pryor kills the man by consuming his soul, and in so doing receives his memories. This tactic then inspires Chasm when it comes to how to best retrieve his memories from Peter. No longer having the device, I believe, that Maxine offered him before, Ben now plans to kill Peter and consume his soul in order to regain the memories lost to him. Not only is that a super dark and terrifying thought and twist, but we also need to acknowledge here that Ben and Janine both became accessories to murder. Number 1. Pain. As if someone wasn't bad enough, it seems the key to understanding Chasm and so many of the characters' narratives present in Dark Web as well is understanding loss and pain. To really understand why Ben becomes Chasm and why he pursues Peter so ruthlessly, you need to understand what his loss feels like. In issue number 14 of Amazing Spider-Man from 2022, Ben describes his loss to Janine and how it feels to him. I've lost a lifetime. I don't know what I was before I woke up in the Jackal's lab. There's nothing and then I'm just there. And everything after that is scrambled. The only memories that seem to punch through, the ones carrying pain. People telling me I'm not real, beyond manipulating me, all the dying, all the loss. I don't remember meeting you, but I remember all the times I lost you. Pain, pain, pain. It's understandable why he and so many others involved in this story seem to be turning to the darker side, because, I mean, they sound to really be hurting. And isn't that how it usually goes? You get hurt, and you usually end up hurting others. Even if on paper that seems like an obvious thing to not do as someone who's been hurt, it never seems to be quite so obvious to characters, or honestly even real world people in the moment. Number 10. Techno-organic virus. For those of you who are joining us after just learning about Cable through his appearance in Deadpool 2, there is so much that you need to know, and so much that might shock you to learn when it comes to this anti-hero. One is that his robot arm and eye are not just cool replacement cybernetic prosthetics, they're actually a part of Cable. His arm and eye were transformed as a result of the techno-organic virus, which has been attacking his body since he was a baby, and which he uses his powers to fend off. Because if it took a hold of him fully, it would kill him. It's actually part of the reason why you don't get to see his psychic abilities used as often, or get to see really how powerful they are, because he's often busy using them to just keep himself alive as he holds back the techno-organic virus. Number 9. Demonic Ritual. Nathan Summers, aka Cable, is the son of Madeline Pryor and Scott Summers, and well, kind of Jean Grey, though she was more like his adopted mother than anything. Madeline, Jean's clone, was his biological mother. Jean was given memories of raising baby Nate during a fight with Madeline, which helped her feel like and basically become his mother in a way. Yeah, it was weird. That was when Madeline killed herself. And we were all like, wait, why'd you do that? However, it was also a good thing that she got those memories, because Nate's natural mom, Madeline, ended up going crazy as a result of Jean's return and learning that she was, well, a clone of Jean created by Mr. Sinister, which, let's be fair, that would make any of us go crazy. In order to get more power after being seduced by the dark side within her and demons, she agreed to sacrifice baby Nate in a demonic ritual. Fortunately, her attempt was stopped. However, later Apocalypse would kidnap this baby and infect him with the techno-organic virus, which would plague him for pretty much the rest of his life. Side note, pretty much everybody wanted perfect baby Nate. It's pretty crazy actually. Sinister's whole reason for creating Madeline was to get her to breed with Scott, and as a result create the perfect mutant offspring, which would be baby Nate. So he wanted him to fight over babies. That happens a lot in X-Men. That's what happened with Hope. Everyone's fighting over babies. Number 8. Super OP version. In the Age of Apocalypse alternate universe of Earth 295, a version of Cable exists in Nate Gray, who is also kind of technically his alternate universe half-sibling. Nate Gray was made by Sinister in this reality using genetic materials from Jean Grey and Scott Summers. The major difference between his origins and his half-brother Cable's is that he was made from the original Jean, not her clone, and he was never exposed to the techno-organic virus. As such, Nate Gray is one of the most powerful mutants to ever exist, often going by the codename X-Man. I imagine if there was a classification above Omega level, he'd be that. But for now, we'll just have to settle with him being considered as Omega. He is an insanely powerful psionic mutant with telepathic and telekinetic abilities. He is immortal, can reality warp, and has even been shown to be able to bring the dead back to life. This is likely what Nathan Summers could have been like in terms of power levels had he not contracted the techno-organic virus. But he did. Number 7. He has an evil clone! That's right, Nathan has an evil clone known as Stryfe. In fact, for a while, Nathan actually thought that he might have been the clone and that the villain Stryfe was the original Nathan Summers, until Mr. Sinister revealed otherwise. Beyond that, people also thought that for some time, Cable was actually evil. Not only was he originally this very mysterious character in the comics, but even after we got to know him a bit better, he was originally suspected of being the one behind the assassination attempt on Charles Xavier. However, it turned out that this was a ruse of Stryfe's, who had impersonated Cable to make him look bad, and had actually made the attempt on Xavier by shooting him with a bullet that infected him with the techno-organic virus. In the end, Cable and the rest of the X-Force came together and managed to save Professor X. Whew, he almost died, but then later he does die. Number 6. Was his evil clone. Sort of. It all boiled down to a big showdown between Cable and Stryfe at the end of the story arc we were just talking about in the last point, which was called Executioner's Song, if you want to look it up, involving the attempted assassination of Charles Xavier. Stryfe ended up being defeated by Cable when he pulled him into a time vortex. The unfortunate thing is that Cable also kinda got pulled into that time vortex. However, Cable managed to survive, and Stryfe died. At least, we thought he did. But what really happened was, although his body perished, his consciousness was basically merged with Cable's, resulting in him continuing to exist, but within Cable. Dun dun dun. Yeah, it gets creepy. I like when things get creepy.
Up next at number 5, Sugar Man. Speaking of Illyana, the mission in which Generation Next attempt to go save Illyana results in a bunch of casualties. Colossus essentially ditches the entire team, leaving them for dead. But none of them are ever to be seen again. At least, until like 10 years after the fact and retcons and whatnot. There's a whole thing about it. But let's talk about Illyana's captor here for a sec, the Sugar Man. The Sugar Man is anything but sweet and delicious. He is a disgusting monster-esque creature who has been keeping Colossus' sister as his slave. He is a unique creation to Age of Apocalypse, having first appeared in Generation Next issue 2 back in April of 1995, and he likes to regularly torment his human slaves. A student of Mr. Sinister, he's a geneticist placed in charge of the Pacific Northwest's human slave camp called Seattle Core. One of the young members of Generation Next, Mondo, is personally killed by Sugar Man during that rescue mission. Actually, quite a few of them are. But that wasn't the last that we would hear of Sugar Man, unfortunately. More on him in a bit. Moving on to number 4, Psylocke. Pretty much every major X-Men character appears in Age of Apocalypse, except one. Psylocke. While she would later appear in the 10th anniversary X-Men Age of Apocalypse issue 4, the character was completely absent the first time around, and there has never been any indication as to where she was, who she was aligned with, etc. Now we do know that she had some sort of past connection with Wolverine, aka Weapon X of that reality, but it's still a big mystery as to what the mutant was up to during that time. Psylocke was introduced as one of Apocalypse's horsemen though in the Fox feature film Age of Apocalypse, played by Olivia Munn. Up next, number 3, Cyclops and Wolverine. During Age of Apocalypse, there were various different titles during the story event that came out to replace ongoing X-Men titles for a brief period of time. Now one of these included Weapon X, the name of Wolverine on this Earth. Weapon X would briefly replace the Wolverine series during the event. Now in this reality, Logan and Jean Grey are lovers, working for the Human High Council, the leadership of remaining humans. The council wanted to bomb the crap out of Earth, something that the two opposed. Anywho, Mr. Sinister, one of Apocalypse's servants, gets the idea that he can create a mutant powerful enough to defeat Apocalypse by using Jean Grey's genetic material and combining it with Cyclops's, who is also an agent of Apocalypse. Jean is then captured, so naturally Weapon X goes to rescue her, but in the process he encounters Cyclops, which results in one of the most brutal fights that these two rivals have ever had. Logan loses a hand and Cyclops loses an eye. Once a rival, always a rival. And at number 2, out with a bang. You know how we mentioned the Human High Council earlier? Well, they're a fun bunch. In contrast to Magneto's X-Men, the extermination of all mutants is totally a viable option for them when it comes to getting rid of Apocalypse. And they also supported the Human Underground Resistance, although secretly. Anywho, the Human High Council decides that they are going to be rid of this threat by bombing the crap out of the planet with nuclear bombs. Fun. Their plan is to get Jean Grey to hold these nukes back just below orbit, but before she can do that, she's killed off by Havoc, causing their plan to backfire, just as Bishop is about to correct the timeline and stop Legion from killing his father. This pretty much destroys the timeline altogether, with the series ending with Magneto, his son, and his wife Rogue watching the incoming blast, eventually being incinerated within the glowing light. And finally, in at number 1, Timeline Escapees. Despite the timeline being destroyed, some of the characters from Earth 295 managed to get out of that timeline, jumping ship to another. Well, the main continuity of Earth 616. Now this includes Sugar Man, unfortunately, who during the climax of the series would shrink himself down, one of his abilities, and pop himself into Colossus's boot, waiting for the opportunity to get the hell out of there. Dark Beast, an evil version of Beast, escaped, along with Blink, Holocaust, and Nate Gray, the Earth 295 version of Cable. Nate would go on to die briefly after teaming up with the X-Men and Spider-Man, but was eventually resurrected, becoming a member of the New Mutants. Blink would go on to lead the Exiles team, hopping around different realities. And Sugar Man stirred up some trouble, of course, having helped the nation of Ganesha become powerful by enslaving mutants. And Dark Beast was sent 20 years into the past of Earth 616, a fact that was later used in retcons in order to have him be the one who created Morlocks. He would go on to join Norman Osborn's Dark X-Men and seemingly die, only to reappear during the 2017 Secret Empire story arc.
Number 10, the 90s movie. Starting off with something fun. There were many a cancelled 90s project, and even earlier actually, and each one is pretty fantastic in an awful kind of way. Though some of them we would have needed. Nicolas Cage's Superman. They've actually been trying to adapt the She-Hulk for years since her origin in 1980. There's been interest, and in the 90s we got close. This was after 2 failed TV projects. There was hopes for this movie. Larry Cohen was set to direct. You may know him from Cellular, Captivity, phone booth, the stuff. 10 months after he was announced, Brigitte Nielsen was set to be She-Hulk. We got to the set photo stage and everything, but it never happened. 90s She-Hulk, I feel like that would have been a mess, which makes me want it more. Number 9. Supporting Tony during Civil War. Like I mentioned in the superhero couples you won't believe exist, Jennifer Walters and Tony Stark have a good relationship, and she ended up supporting him during Civil War, the first one, Civil War 1, which was interesting. So Civil War boiled down to pro-superhero registration, Tony, and anti-superhero registration, Steve. Sometimes going over who sided with who and why could get real convoluted. I mean, yes, Jennifer is a lawyer, but at the same time her cousin is the Hulk, and she's always, or well used to be, supportive of him. So her supporting Tony despite his secret prisons with Reed was interesting, and we needed conflict. It can't just be Tony and Steve punching each other. Still, the pro-registration side was very much presented as wrong, and hence so were the people who supported it. There were claims that this argument was nuanced, which it was, but it wasn't presented that way. Number 8. Competing with Wonder Woman. So Marvel Comics, has long had a bit of a chip on their shoulder that they don't have a female heroine exactly comparable to Wonder Woman. And for me, that's not a dig. Both companies have some amazing female characters, but Wonder Woman is very unique. For a time, there was hope that She-Hulk could be their Wonder Woman. Writer Peter David expressed as much, stating, "She-Hulk has the potential to be our Wonder Woman, a powerful female with a strong moral center and a determination to do what's right. She's also a unique combination of brains and brawn. The ideal She-Hulk story is one that plays on both aspects of her makeup, the intelligence combined with her strength." Quote done. However, there's a little hitch in her origin that bothers modern Marvel, and in their minds keeps She-Hulk from achieving this status, which they appear to currently be trying to assign to Captain Marvel Carol Danvers, and it may result in some changes to She-Hulk's origin in the MCU, but more on that later. Number 7. Breaking the fourth wall. So She-Hulk used to break the fourth wall. In fact, she's notable for being one of the first Marvel characters to do so, some say the first. She had meta-ness in her character and at times appeared to be aware that she was a comic book character and would most frequently make jokes about the comics code, which she was frequently accused of violating. This would add to the humor of her character, though she would never approach what Deadpool would later approach, years later. He wasn't like that when he was first introduced. Number 6. She's beaten Sentry. So She-Hulk is quite the powerhouse, which by the way is now Franklin Richards' superhero name. Fun fact. She-Hulk would accomplish this during Dark Reign and the 4-part series All New Savage She-Hulk. She ends up being enraged after Sentry dismisses her in a fight, so she pummels him to the ground. This is quite impressive given the overpowered status that he occupies in the Marvel Universe. So for her to be able to do that, be afraid. Or perhaps question the power levels of the situation. Is this a Harley taking out Superman and the Flash situation? At separate times, not at the same time. Share your thoughts. I enjoy hearing from you. I really do.
Number 5. Officially registered under the Superhuman Registration Act. During the Superhuman Registration Act and the events of Civil War, Moon Knight is being monitored by Tony Stark. Concerned about his sanity and considering Moon Knight unfit to be a hero, Stark considers arresting Moon Knight. Eventually, Mark reluctantly registers, listening to the voice of Konshu, who implores him to do so. Unfortunately, he has to undergo and pass a psychiatric examination in order to be approved. Of course, the psychiatrist has no intention of passing Mark after interviewing his multiple personalities, but just as he was about to be failed, Mark uses the will of Konshu to convince the psychiatrist to approve him. Or rather, Konshu speaks through Mark. The psychiatrist does just that and also ends up bowing down to him. Ooh, scary stuff. Number 4. Heroic Personas. With an S. You may be familiar with Moon Knight, Mark Spector's vigilante persona, but are you familiar with his other heroic personas? I'm not talking about Mr. Knight, Jake Lockley, or Steve Grant. I'm talking about Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Wolverine, among others. Mark is called on these personas when acting alone to try and bolster his courage. He even impersonated Spider-Man while getting into a fight at a strip club, much to Spider-Man's dismay. Number 3. Marks people for their crimes. In Moon Knight Volume 3, part of the complaints made against Moon Knight while he is wrestling with the Superhuman Registration Act is that he is marking people. While we discussed the face-off situation between he and Bushman on the previous Scary Facts list, this one may be even scarier. As I've said before, Moon Knight is not your typical Marvel superhero. Some may not even consider him a superhero, because he is violent, gruesome, and dark. He marks his victims with the symbol of the moon by carving it into their skin. The idea is probably to teach them a lesson, to mark them and make them remember. However, some of his victims don't seem to learn, and so they get marked multiple times. It will be interesting to see if the MCU adopts this trait of marks. It will be interesting to see if the MCU adopts this. Ooh. Number 2. Watches you in the dark. As scary as this one sounds, it's really kinda sweet. While Moon Knight is often known as being a vigilante who gets his powers and strength from the moon, that is to say he's stronger at night and is known as Konshu, the Egyptian moon god's servant, he was also at one point a protector of travelers, specifically those of course that traveled at night. He would follow around everyday people who are on their way home from work or just on their way from one place to another. He has even guarded over those who are asleep, traveling in their dreams. Not going to lie, the idea of anyone watching me while I sleep at night creeps me out, even if it's just Moon Knight trying to protect me. Thanks, but also kind of no thanks. Number 1. He's not real. Or is he? Mark Spector has dealt with pondering about whether or not Konshu is real when it comes to wrestling with his mental illness, making us also wonder at the same thing. But we have always known that at least he is real, right? Wrong. In Moon Knight Volume 3, the writers of the series at the time even tried to mess with our reality when it comes to the character's appearance. While being shot at, his attacker demands to know in frustration why none of his bullets seem to be hitting Moon Knight, to which Mark replies, "I'm not real." The way the action sequence is drawn even leaves the reader questioning. The first 6 issues of this Moon Knight run are also maybe some of the neatest. They are also the issues that involve his run-in with ghosts, and who doesn't want to see Moon Knight question his own existence and punch ghosts? The creative team of Warren Ellis, Declan Shalvey, and Jordi Belair, who worked on these issues, did a brilliant job with the series' first arc before leaving to create the series Injection over at Image Comics, which you should also check out if you enjoyed their exploration of Moon Knight's character. Plus, it's also really pretty. Number 10. First appearance. While Gorr the God Butcher is mentioned in Thor God of Thunder issue number 1, the character actually makes their first appearance in the following issue, issue number 2. Gorr was created by Asad Rabish and Jason Aaron, and is introduced to us as a literal butcher and destroyer of gods. Really, in issue 1 we are introduced to Gorr by not just name but by his handiwork, as Thor comes across dead gods of a world that claims they no longer have any to answer their prayers. It turns out that this is not because the gods have forsaken them, but because their gods are literally dead, killed by Gorr. In issue number 2, we see Gorr pursue Thor, hoping to find other gods and following him. The two face off in the clouds, having a bloody fight where Gorr promises to butcher Thor, as he has done to many gods before. Fortunately, he does not succeed, and Thor manages to escape, despite being pretty badly beaten by Gorr. However, this issue would set the precedent for the kind of fights you expect to see Gorr get into. If y'all thought Hela was bad, just wait till you meet Gorr. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists centered around Love and Thunder, which I'm sure is going to have lots of cool stuff in it, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Forsaken. Speaking of potentially being forsaken by your gods, that is exactly what happened to Gorr and his people, which was why he became a god butcher in the first place. After losing his entire family due to natural disasters and starvation, Gorr rebuked the gods, deciding he did not believe in them. As a result, he was ostracized from his people for his lack of belief. It was then that he stumbled upon 2 gods in a battle between one another and learned that they did actually exist. They simply didn't seem to care. Furious at this revelation, Gorr ended up killing both gods, or at least that's what it seemed like, and then began to wonder if there were any others out in the cosmos, deciding he would look and see and kill all gods that he found in revenge for all he had lost due to their inaction. Number 8. The all-black Necrosword. How does Gorr manage to defeat so many gods? Well, this is largely thanks to his bond with the All-Black, or the Necrosword, or the All-Black Necrosword, or the Godslayer. It's got a lot of names. This weapon is actually the first symbiote as well. It is all-powerful and lends to Gorr the strength he needs in order to face off with and defeat the gods. And what's more, Gorr doesn't just use the All-Black as a weapon, but he also bonds with it, becoming one with the symbiote and essentially through it gaining a sense of immortality for as long as a small piece of the All-Black remains. Gorr's consciousness too kind of lives on within it, meaning that from the All-Black he can live on and essentially reform in a way. Number 7. Knull, the King in Black, and also known as the God of Symbiotes. Gorr and Knull kind of have a history, albeit a quite brief history. In case you were wondering where the All-Black came from as a symbiote, it did come from Knull himself. Knull had set out on a mission to destroy all those that represented light in the universe, seeking to destroy in essence all of the good gods. He created his firstborn, the All-Black, which was a powerful weapon that he used in battle to carry out his mission. However, he ended up falling during this time. As Knull lay temporarily defeated, Gorr came upon him and took the All-Black for himself. The golden god that Knull fought begged Gorr for help, which Gorr ignored as he felt he'd been ignored, instead choosing to kill the god in response. He probably thought the dark god Knull was also dead as well, but of course we know that Knull didn't die there and instead lived on for a long time thereafter. Number 6. An ancient evil. Not only does Gorr have the All-Black, which is considered to be an ancient embodiment of evil itself, but he too is also an ancient villain. Gorr might be newer when it comes to Marvel Comics history, but within the lore of the world, he has been alive for thousands of years and spent millennia hunting down and murdering gods, which means at this point he's pretty much an expert when it comes to his capabilities and his skill set. That will also likely be Gorr's story previous to when we meet him in the MCU, meaning he'll be a devastating foe for both Thor Odinson and Jane Foster's mighty Thor to go up against.
Moving on to number 5, brains, brains, brains. Venom eats brains. This is because brains contain something called phenethylamine, a substance that is also found in chocolate. Another fun fact about Venom is that he loves chocolate for this sole reason, although it's not a scary fact, so it didn't really get its own number. Anyway, because of this, Venom craves phenethylamine, which is a neurotransmitter found within the human brain. Now in 1996, we first witnessed him eat his victim's brains on panel, with Eddie Brock being horrified by it. This went down in Venom the Hunger issue 1. Brock was so traumatized by his actions via Venom that he had to temporarily separate from the symbiote, making Venom promise that it would never eat another brain while Brock was his host and stick to his chocolate diet instead. Although once Brock was no longer the host, that changed, but more on that in a sec. Moving on to number 4, Venom feeds off cancer. If the brain thing wasn't bad enough, Venom's diet also consists of large quantities of cancer. Yes, Venom feeds off of cancerous cells, so to speak. Or at least he did briefly. In 2005, it was revealed that one of the reasons why Venom was so keen on bonding with Eddie Brock wasn't because of their mutual dislike of Spider-Man, although apparently that still played a big part. The reason is that Brock was suffering from cancer this entire time, and the symbiote was feeding off of the adrenaline that the cancer was producing in Brock's body. In turn, he was keeping Brock alive. Since then, there's been a lot of little retcons concerning their relationship, since many fans felt that that was a stupid reason to have them connect in the first place. In at number 3, a history of sexual assault. Okay, so this one is really bad. In Venom Volume 1, Issue 12, a corporation known as the Ararat Corporation tries to use the Venom symbiote for their own agenda. Having recently parted ways with Eddie Brock, the symbiote did not have a host at the time, so the corporation attempted to make that happen. That did not go so well, since Venom killed most of the potential hosts that they threw at him. To make matters worse, they sent in 2 potential hosts for him at once, a mental patient and a serial killer. What does Venom do? Well, he decides to screw with them. He jumps between the men to learn more about them, and discovers that the serial killer murdered 4 men who had sexually assaulted him in prison. So Venom decides to bond to the mental patient and attack the serial killer, stating, I quote, "It's going to happen again." Yeah, that's f***ed. Then the assault happens off panel, with the serial killer being revealed to be deceased afterwards. This isn't the only time that the symbiote has pulled some whack stuff as far as sexual assault goes. There was a point during Venom the Madness, a 3-part miniseries that ran between 1993 and 1994, where Venom tried to assault Brock's girlfriend at the time, Beck. The idea behind this story is that there is no true symbiosis between Host and Clintar, and when conflict arose between the 2 identities, that results in a 3rd entity called Insanity. It was the Insanity who decided to assault people, apparently. Luckily, the assault never actually happens, because Juggernaut storms in and fights Venom, which might be one of the only times readers were excited to see Juggernaut save the day. In at number 2, Venom is a cannibal. One of Venom's more violent periods is when the symbiote had Mac Gargan as his host. Gargan, aka the Scorpion of Spider-Man fame, had a more nefarious temperament than other hosts the likes of Eddie Brock or Flash Thompson, so Venom fully indulged in some behavior the symbiote hadn't tapped into since his early days on panel, and worse. This iteration of Venom was straight up into eating people. Gargan's time with Venom is perhaps one of Venom's most gruesome. Not only would he eat brains, but he also ate body parts. He once ate an entire scroll. Brock was able to keep those urges at bay, but when it was Gargan's turn, the symbiote was insatiable, eating the bodies of his victims. That's cannibalism, friends. And finally, in at number 1, Venom has committed genocide. Planetary genocide. It's something that quite a few Planetary genocide. It's something that quite a few characters in Marvel's roster have on their resume, including Venom. In Venom Space Knight issue 8, Venom decides to get something off his chest. He admits to his then host Flash Thompson that he was responsible for killing everyone on the homeworld of one of his first hosts. As the story goes, Venom had been badly wounded after separating from his very first host, and in the aftermath he bonded with another alien, whose name he never mentions. This alien was different though. It contained a bottomless rage inside of it that took advantage of Venom, using Venom's powers to kill everyone on its homeworld. As Venom puts it, I quote, "My first host came back to his homeworld and murdered it. We murdered it. He was a cruel and twisted soul who showed me the cruelty and twistedness of my own soul." Venom attributes this event to why he was so full of hate himself initially.
Number 10. Beyond Corporation. What happened to make Ben Reilly become the villainous being known as Chasm? That's a good question. Really, this is all explained in the pages of the Spider-Man Beyond event or storyline, which had a ton of tie-ins as well as extra bonus stories with their Point Bay issues, which occurred in between issues of the main storyline, diving deeper into the intricacies of smaller story points as the story unfolded. The Beyond event was a weekly release, so there was lots to read for those of us who followed along with this event. But overall, I'd say this event was worth all the reading, with lots of fun moments as well as many twists and turns to keep us guessing, as well as keep us eager to turn every single page. One of the highlights for me was definitely the team up between Mary Jane and Black Cat. In the Beyond event, Ben Reilly takes over the mantle of Spider-Man after the Beyond Corporation gains the rights to the Spider-Man name and hires him to be basically their Spider-Man. Peter for a while is in a coma, leaving Ben mostly uncontested for the Spider-Man moniker, except for Miles of course, who is actually served papers and threatened to change his name or deal with being sued. Eventually, it's revealed that Beyond was manipulating Ben's mind, and even that Ben had signed off on this, wanting to forget some less desirable moments in his past. However, after he catches on to their real purpose, a violent mind wipe goes wrong, leaving integral memories of Ben damaged and causing him to forget who he is and kind of have like a bit of an identity crisis. In the end, he chooses to die rather than accept help from Peter and falls into a pit of green ooze as the Beyond Corporation headquarters in New York is destroyed. Or at least, we thought he was dead. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd and you love hearing about how some more heroic characters can become evil, we have a Top 10 Evil Alternate Versions playlist for you to check out, where you can learn about all the evil alternates that exist in the multiverse. Number 9. The Ooze. In reality, Ben fell into the pit of ooze and was reborn again, this time with improved oozified powers. These newfound powers give him an enhanced spider sense, which also lashes out at the danger that he senses. He can also hit people with blasts of ooze now too. Ooze-tastic. Number 8. Dark Web. What is Dark Web? Well, it's the current ongoing Spider-Man event, following what happened in Beyond, which we already touched on and which resulted in the creation of Chasm. Ben Reilly now has a new identity and a new purpose. He has been warped by his loss of memories completely, and probably from falling into a bunch of ooze. He decides the best course of action now is to take out those responsible for his fall from grace, and he decides to ally himself with others who have been wronged in order for them to all achieve their own similar but different objectives. Chasm's plan is to defeat Peter Parker, who he sees as a threat, and who he ultimately blames for all the things that have befallen him, basically feeling that like Peter is kind of keeping memories from him, when really that's not what Peter wants to be doing. Dark Web is about these various villains coming together to redeem what they feel they are owed, having all been twisted in some way by past traumas, and for some of them kind of current traumas. Really, it's an event about confronting the pain others have caused you and all the various ways you can deal with, and you can hopefully potentially heal from that. Number 7. Chasm. Why the name Chasm? Does it mean anything to Ben? Why, yes, of course it does. Chasm is a name that Ben chose in reference to the memories that he is missing, because without them there is a great void in his mind. You might say, a great chasm? What memories did Ben lose? Well, chiefly he lost the memories that made him who he was, a hero. He lost the formative memories that he shares with Peter of their childhood, a childhood that Peter actually lived but Ben only remembers. He also lost some of the memories that Beyond wanted him to lose, ideally, which means that he wouldn't have remembered uncovering their secrets. So in that way, it kind of makes sense that when it comes to who he blames for the missing memories and the lack of a sense of self, he would blame Peter for this more than not. Although I do believe at the end of Beyond he does kind of figure out that Beyond was still kind of behind everything, but I do question how much of the memories he has of that are there. There is also the fact that Maxine Danger, head of the division of Beyond that Ben did work for, implied that the only way to get back his memories would basically be to use one of their devices to forcefully take said memories from Peter, pitting the two against one another during the final showdown in that event. Number 6. The Calling. We also learn near the beginning of Dark Web of how Chasm may not have even been the major player behind the plot here. As Chasm, Ben is suffering. He is questioning who he is, and every thought and memory he has left seems to only cause him more suffering, more pain. He has been raiding Beyond safe houses, as we learn in issue number 14 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, and finding all kinds of tech there. And it seems to be one of the only things that brings him any sense of relief. Well, maybe other than Janine's presence, who, you know, she obviously I think makes him feel a little better. The tech he claims feels like some kind of key. He knows that Beyond was using it in some kind of project that was near completion called Project Purgatory, and he believes with his genius he can actually get it to work. And it seems that is the key to the calling he is feeling, reaching out to him from a place. A place called...
And at 5, personal movie. During his work on X-Men Apocalypse, editor John Ottoman wondered what it would be like if Beast had his own spin-off movie. No, I did not make a mistake with the name, this is a story, follow me. When he had this idea, he approached his assistant Brian Burton, who was an aspiring screenwriter. Ottoman was skeptical that Beast could hold his own movie, but Burton, seeing an opportunity, cranked out a script in 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure that's kinda tough. The film would have had Beast teaming up with Wolverine and Professor X to take down the big bad, but the real villain would have been Mr. Sinister, who would have served as this arc's Thanos, being the big bad who was orchestrating things like Thanos was in the Infinity Saga of the MCU. They, with this idea, had also wrote a late 80s era Omega Red film where Mr. Sinister would have been testing the X-Men. The idea of an Omega Red film is something that I've seen several fans mention on various forums and Reddit posts, so the fact that this could have been a thing if they hadn't been working on Dark Phoenix and been able to read the script just breaks my heart. They didn't read the script because they didn't want Dark Phoenix to be influenced by the Omega Red script, so. But it could still maybe happen, but they would have to cut Logan out since Hugh Jackman left the role. But this would come after a Beast movie, so if we see a Beast movie, you can expect an Omega Red movie. I doubt it. And at 4, original enemy. Well, yes, Omega Red is known for being a villain of the X-Men, or Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe. This might not have been his original purpose for creation. After being arrested, Arcady fell into the hands of the KGB, also known as the, I'm sorry for butchering this, Komiet Gursalavani Bezopansoni. No, that's not it, whatever. Or the Russian State Security Committee, which was the primary security agency of the Soviet Union, who wanted to use Arcady for their super soldier program in order to create a soldier like Captain America. So if things had gone differently, he could have ended up becoming a Captain America villain. But then they implanted cybernetic enhancements and then tentacles, so there wasn't really a place for him in the soldier, war-prone world of Captain America, who always loves reminding people how he was frozen for 70 years. How would you feel if Omega Red was a Captain America villain rather than an X-Men villain? Sound off in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious. I think I prefer him as an X-Men villain though. And at 3, defeated Tony Stark. Omega Red is an extremely badass character that definitely can handle most people in a fight, once fighting Wolverine for 17 hours straight, which is unbelievable because I struggled to even stay awake for 17 hours, and I know for a fact that I'm gonna fall asleep on my way home tonight. However, when Omega Red has fought Tony Stark, he seems to be fairly well matched. In Iron Man 297, Omega Red comes close to defeating our gold titanium alloyed hero during a battle with Modem, when Omega Red is telling Modem that she is in fact Olenka Barankova, but she didn't believe him. While he battled Modem, Tony was able to recover, but there was another point where Omega Red was actually able to defeat Tony Stark, but I can't remember the issue or even find the issue online. So if you do know, make sure to mention it in the comments because I swear that it actually happened. I swear he actually beat him. I just honestly can't remember it for the life of me. Help. In it 2, the army. When Arcady developed his mutation, his family became scared of him, and his bloodlust developed after he started mutilating animals and started killing old beggars. Due to him being afraid, Arcady's brother ended up betraying him by ratting him out to the authorities. He later joined the Russian army where he became part of the Spetsnaz. Despite serving in the army, he also continued his crimes. He started to prey on young children, especially young girls, as he kidnapped and killed them. His crimes went unnoticed for a time until he went and got himself transferred to a Soviet outpost near the Arctic Circle, where the the disappearance and death of several children were finally noticed by other Russian soldiers, since, you know, it's the Arctic Circle. It's not like there's a lot of people up there, not even Canadians, sorry to break it to you. After discovering the atrocious crimes he committed, he was executed by the Red Army, but his unmanifested mutant powers saved him from death, which prompted his superiors to use him for their super soldier program, where he was given the super soldier serum and all the cybernetic enhancements. Finally, in at number 1, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Warning, potential spoilers for the Disney Plus series Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Okay, now you're gone. Posted late into the night on February 23rd, an anonymous 4chan user posted a plot synopsis for an episode they supposedly saw for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where Sam and Bucky have to work with Zemo to track down a crime syndicate known as the Alchemists. They, along with Zemo, go to Madripoor where they meet Omega Red. The character could be a gateway for the X-Men into the MCU, due to his deep link with Wolverine and the others, but comic origins haven't stopped the MCU from changing things to fit their own canon, since they are on a separate Earth. However, since Omega Red was originally an attempt to make a Captain America clone, perhaps this is the story they will go with. How would you feel about the X-Men being introduced into the MCU, both in general and in this fashion? Let me know below in the comments.
In at number 10, Altered Timeline. For starters, let's talk about the timeline. When Legion kills Charles Xavier, it drastically changes the way events pan out in the timeline. Without Professor Xavier around, Apocalypse attacks 10 years sooner than he does in the original 616 timeline, with him succeeding and taking over the Earth. Magneto leads a mutant resistance and sends Bishop back in time to prevent Xavier's murder, ultimately undoing the timeline altogether, thankfully. What else? Well, Magneto actually forms the X-Men in this reality, just as Apocalypse begins his war. But they weren't as coordinated as Xavier's X-Men were, and therefore North America defenses who stand up against Apocalypse and his horsemen are seriously lacking. In addition to that, many of our beloved heroes outside of the X-Men are killed or just cease to exist. As for humans, well, Apocalypse initiates something called cullings, mass genocide of humans that leaves millions of them dead. Ugh. And at number 9, Magneto and Rogue. Age of Apocalypse has many weird and twisted moments. Perhaps one of the strangest events to occur in its narrative was that Magneto and Rogue shacked up. The two got married and had a kid. So let's jump back for a second. When the storyline starts off, Gambit and Rogue are still a couple. Gambit, hoping to find a way to physically touch Rogue, brings her to Magneto for help. Of course, the magnetic mastermind is able to find a way to touch Rogue via creating a microscopic field. Now, touch is kind of a big deal for her, so having the ability to get physical with her made Magneto hella appealing. But that's not all. Scarlet Witch, aka Wanda Maximoff, Magneto's daughter, would receive a fatal injury in the series, causing her death. But she was not entirely gone. A piece of her mind was within Rogue, and Wanda had requested that Rogue look after Magneto as her dying wish. So it actually kind of feels a little bit weird because of that, because there's a piece of his daughter in her and they're boning. Rogue eventually breaks the news to Gambit, who then sulks away, lamenting on how it's time for him to be alone again. Oh. Kinda feel bad for Gambit in this case. Pretty important in Age of Apocalypse. Moving on to number 8, prequels galore. For almost 10 years, Earth 295 was considered to be a dead reality, but Marvel still took advantage of its popularity and published a variety of prequels that took place in that timeline. Blink, a character who would end up in the 616 timeline, more on that later, would have his own prequel solo 4-issue miniseries that was primarily set in the Negative Zone. X-Man, the series that had initially replaced Cable during the Age of Apocalypse event, returned as a prequel, depicting a younger Nate Summers. There was even a prequel that followed Corsair, aka Christopher Summers, Scott's dad, returning to Earth to be reunited with Scott and Havoc, aka Alex's brother, titled Sinister Bloodlines. It wasn't just prequels though. An X-Men Age of Apocalypse one-shot would come out in 2005, followed by a 6-issue limited series. Speaking of, in at number 7, the limited series. In 2005, that limited series called X-Men Age of Apocalypse was released, which took place a year after the events of the original Age of Apocalypse. But it seemed to retcon much of the damage the world had taken in that initial story, giving readers a USA that felt very similar to the Earth 616 version. Magneto, who is the acting director of Mutant Affairs, is working to take down any surviving mutants allied with Apocalypse, while Weapon X, aka Wolverine, roams Canada, murdering off any of the villain's old allies and followers. Throughout the series, it's revealed that Jean Grey is alive as well. You'll see in a bit why that is not really, okay. But, maybe that's just a subjective opinion. And at number 6, Murderous. Age of Apocalypse transforms many of our favorite heroes into murderous villains of sorts. This includes Cyclops and his brother Havoc. with the latter being far worse than the former. The brothers worked under Mr. Sinister at the breeding pits. Guess what those are? And Havoc was known to be utterly psychotic. He would actually go on to murder not only Jean Grey, but his own brother, who he had a deep-rooted jealousy of, only to be ended by Weapon X, aka Logan, by the end of the story. Colossus also does some pretty messed up stuff too. When Magneto's X-Men storm Apocalypse's stronghold in an attempt to retrieve their captive leader, and also create a massive diversion, Colossus loses his cool, big time. His sister Ileana plays a big role in this. Now for context, in the Generation Next series of the story event, we follow a team of young mutants trained by Colossus and his then wife Shadowcat. Magneto sends the team to go rescue Colossus' sister, who has a very special power. She's the last surviving transdimensional teleporter. Magneto intended to use her in order to send Bishop back in time to prevent the timeline from occurring. But during their siege on the stronghold, Colossus loses his crap over potentially losing his sister, which results in him going on a murderous rampage during the battle. Iceman attempts to get him to chill out, pun fully intended, but Colossus smashes him to smithereens. Then when Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat, his wife, tries to talk him down, she steps in his way, believing that he won't hurt her despite Gambit's warnings. And Gambit was right. Colossus ends up killing her. So then Gambit has to put him down.
Number 5. Omega level telepath. Especially if you have discovered the character of Cable through another form of media other than comics, you might be surprised to hear this fact. Being the biological son of Jean Grey's clone and the adopted son of Jean Grey herself, Nathan's telepathic powers are, well, they're off the charts. We don't see him flex them though as often as his combative skills, because the techno-organic virus requires him to invest some of his telepathic and telekinetic strength just to keep it at bay. But when he does decide to use these powers, even though they are both kind of restricted, it's amazing what he can still accomplish. Telepathic feats include being able to tap into the mind of everyone on the planet all at once, repairing years of brain damage within Deadpool's mind with just a touch, and defeating hundreds of militia just by influencing them to not fight him instead. That'd be cool if someone's like, I'm gonna kill you, and you could just be like, no. And they're like, oh okay, I see your point. Emma Frost was barely able to shield a conversation from Cable even while using the full power of Cerebro. That's just how powerful of a telepath he is. Just to put that into perspective for you. I love Emma's face too in that panel. She's just like, trying. It's so funny when you have to see people like telepathically do things in their minds. It's like I'm fighting, it's intense. Number 4. Almost defeated the entire Avengers team. During the 4-part miniseries Avengers Sanction, which happened right before things got crazy in Avengers vs. X-Men, Cable vowed to take on the Avengers, who he believed would be responsible for killing Hope Summers, his adopted daughter, in the future. Killing her in the future. She's not from the future. Well, she's kind of from the future. Sometimes. Anyways, Cable ended up capturing 2 of the big team leaders, defeating them in combat, namely Captain America and Iron Man. I know, pretty impressive, especially considering that Nathan was dying at the time as the techno-organic virus fought to fully take over his body. In the end, however, Cyclops and Hope convinced Cable that this wasn't the right move. They freed the Avengers and cured Cable fully of the techno-organic virus, with a little help from Hope's access to the Phoenix Flames. Always helpful to have someone who has a spark of Phoenix inside them. Number 3. Young again. Cable has been young a few times in the comics. He continues to have this serious case of Benjamin Button syndrome that most people are not a huge fan of. People tend to actually like old, grizzled, white-haired Cable better than young, grizzled, also kind of white-haired Cable. I personally like both myself, but currently in the comics we appear to be stuck with the young Cable, who you will notice appears in the Dawn of X relaunch in titles like Fallen Angels, X-Men, and in his own series Cable Volume 4, which by the way recently came out on March 11th if you were interested in checking out issue number 1. Young Cable actually killed his older self after the two clashed over what to do about some time-displaced younger X-Men. Isn't that just how it goes? Don't you hate when you get in a fight with yourself and kill your older version? I know I do. Number 2. Cured himself. Cable has been cured of the techno-organic virus a few times. One of the most astounding times that this happened in the comics was when he cured himself of it. The cure for legacy virus had reportedly somewhat weakened the power of his infection, and when that happened, Cable took this as his opportunity to fight back. Concentrating, he was momentarily able to rewrite his DNA and remove the virus from within him. Yeah, that's right, he was able to rewrite his DNA. That's insane. Also, what a 90s story this was. Oh, the 90s, when anything was possible. You could rewrite your own DNA if you wanted. Number 1. Future Cannonball? The character of Cable was originally created by Rob Liefeld and Louise Simonson. The idea behind the character in terms of what they were tasked with creating was just a man of action. Someone who could act as a foil to Professor Charles Xavier, his parallel opposite basically. Thus, the mysterious time traveler from the future, Cable, was created. Originally we didn't know a lot about him, and it was writer Chris Claremont who later came up with the idea to make him a future version of baby Nate Summers, Maddie and Scott's baby boy, but all grown up and raised in the future. Liefeld actually had a different backstory in mind for the character and didn't actually like the idea of him being Nathan Summers originally. His plan had been to make Cable the mentor of Sam Guthrie, Cannonball. It would later be revealed that Cable was actually Guthrie from the future, but he just didn't remember this. This is supposedly the real reason why Sam Guthrie was made an external, helping to explain how powerful his future self was and would become, and likely also why it was never really brought up again later in the comics that Cannonball was so powerful, because he was an external. In fact, Cable himself would later state that Guthrie being an external was nothing more than a rumor, and that there was no truth to it at all, retconning the power level Cannonball had once been stated to be at, because now it's not really relevant anymore, because we decided to go with a different story for him. Meh.